Let's make the future.
Single data, and forgive me, Commander, is a curiosity. A wonder even, but thousands of datas. Isn't that becoming a race? And won't we be judged by how we treat that race? Now tell me, Commander, what is data? I don't understand. What is he?
A machine.
Is he? Are you sure?
Yes.
You see, he's met 2 of your 3 criteria for sentience, so what if he meets the 3rd? Consciousness in even the smallest degree. What is he then? I don't know. Do you? Do you? Do you? Well, that's the question you have to answer.
Welcome to Let's Make the Future, a discussion about future trends, technologies, and their implications for human society. We are coming to you from all over the world, featuring the voices of Daniel Valenzuela, Michael Oloronimo, and Michael Curry. Music and editing, Christian Peltonen. This episode's future trend discussion topic: Artificial General Intelligence, with Dr. Stephen Larson and Tim Shee. Brought to you by Fling.Asia, Urban Drone Delivery. Get it fast. Fling it. Fling!
Welcome to Let's Make the Future. Our topic this week is Artificial General Intelligence. I'm Michael Curry.
Hi, I'm Daniel Valenzuela, coming from Munich today.
My name is Michael Oloronimo. I'm calling from Redwood City in California.
And in addition to our regular panelists, we welcome 2 guests, Stephen Larson and Tim Shee. Tim Shee is a Stanford University computer science student and founder of Moxel.ai, a machine learning social aggregation platform. Dr. Stephen Larson is CEO of Metacell, a bioinformatics software services company. He's a graduate of MIT in computer science and received a PhD in neuroscience from UC San Diego. He's also co-founder and project director of a project very close to my heart, OpenWorm, whose mission is to simulate the body and neural network of the nematode C. elegans in a computer. I wrote up a little thing here, partly cribbed from Wikipedia. Artificial General Intelligence is the intelligence of a machine that could successfully perform any intellectual task that a human being can. It is a primary goal of some artificial intelligence research, and it's a common topic in science fiction and future studies. Perhaps, Tim, you could favor us with a bit more detail. What is your background as it relates to artificial intelligence?
Currently, I'm a student at Stanford, and I've been doing research in the lab with Persida, and we're doing like NLP research. For the past year, I've been working on a project trying to build like a general purpose reinforcement learning agent for the web. So the idea is like you can go to any website and use like the framework of reinforcement learning and try to build an agent that could operate on the website. So you can do general tasks like booking a flight or using currency exchange or just searching for a restaurant that you want to go to. So gradually want to automate everything we do on the internet. And recently I've been working on a project called Moxel.ai. So our goal is to basically envision the place to people upload their machine intelligence, and it will be a place where people can share machine intelligence and reuse other people's models. The hope is that we could leverage that and make machine learning more democratized.
That's a fascinating idea, to make the underlying data that makes the insights that they generate possible, and to make that data more available. The greatest feat humanity has yet achieved is landing humans on the moon in 1969, which was impressive on a technical level and is a symbol of humanity stepping beyond the cradle. But less than 100 years later, it seems likely that humans will best both the science and symbolism of this feat, as we might achieve creation itself and create a mind in our own image. So I feel like what Tim was just describing in his work is a series of steps perhaps towards that goal that I'm interested in talking about today at a general level. And Stephen, you're also working in a field that connects to this research in some way and can also speak to it. But I'd be interested to hear about how OpenWorm might contribute to humanity's achievement of artificial general intelligence.
Thanks, Michael. Well, the only instance of general intelligence that we have to look at is the one that's produced by the human brain. And trying to understand the human brain deeply has been a great mystery of biology and neuroscience for 100 years. If you count the modern neuroscience, a lot longer if you count the amount of time that human beings have been wondering how their minds work. When you dive into trying to understand the human brain, you realize how far we still have to go to understand it and how vast it is in terms of trying to work out individual mechanisms. So several years back, with a bunch of colleagues, I started a project called OpenWorm, which took a very humble step towards understanding any number of neurons in a whole organism. And we picked a really probably the best studied organism known to man, which happens to be a microscopic worm that only has 302 neurons in it. And realizing that neuroscience still didn't have a deep understanding of how these 302 neurons even produced simple swimming and crawling behaviors, we set about building an open science project to try and unpack this with the idea that there's no way to figure out the systems in the human brain until we can understand some very simple network. So although right now we are mainly focused on the biology of this much more humble organism, the idea is that principles that we uncover in this network could be applied down the road to understanding the human brain, and then ultimately what are the mechanisms that the human brain uses to produce intelligence.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm just struggling now to connect everything that we're talking about together, because it's fascinating to see the different approaches that are being taken to take us closer to this goal. So whereas Tim has been following a program of research that involves techniques that are specifically optimized to solve very specific problems, Stephen is taking a wholly different approach, going from first principles with biology and looking at a specific organism and seeing if that organism might have some insights to give us on this path towards creating a human-level artificial intelligence. So completely, radically different approaches, and yet, again, motivated by that same goal. So I wonder if either of our guests has an opinion about which approach we think will ultimately yield the most fruit. Is it good to have both? Is there a chance that one will become basically a dead end because we, right now, I suppose, don't know exactly what approach will lead to the promised land? Any opinions there?
I'll let Tim go first.
Well, I think there was the argument that, like, if you want to build an aircraft, you don't have to study the bird, or you don't have to, like, figure out the aerodynamics. And I think the same might apply here for artificial intelligence, because I think the brain is such a very emergent system that requires a lot of nonlinear dynamics, and it will be very hard to understand the brain and every detail and to be able to reconstruct it from scratch. Maybe we might be able to figure out, like, the fundamental principle that lead to the emergence, but that requires like a lot of, that's impossible to reverse engineer, and only through like endless experimentation of different principles that we try run a simulation and see if the principle can lead to an emergent intelligence. So I'm more in favor of the approach of taking an algorithm and run the simulation, or taking kind of what we do with neural networks, try to optimize it for a particular goal. That's my point of view here. But I think that for our artificial intelligence right now, people do look at inspirations from biology, and especially the neural network land. People have looked at a lot of inspirations more on the high level principles rather than how the mechanisms actually work. And that inspiration has pushed this field forward a lot.
Right. So the very nature of a neural network, an artificial neural network, was first inspired by biology. But is there any role for biology anymore? Are there any frogs in the rainforest like the pharmaceutical companies find, proverbially speaking, as far as artificial intelligence research goes? Or is biology not necessary anymore and the field can push forward without really looking to the actual specifics of how ion channels work and the neural network actually operates in a real human? Stephen.
Yeah, the two areas are proceeding, I think, in a classic dichotomy between science and engineering. So artificial intelligence proceeds mainly by people innovating and building on foundations of the past. So it's very much building on top of previous work. Whereas on the biology side and the neuroscience side, we are in a realm of discovery. We are letting nature teach us lessons through direct investigation of the brain. So I think the proof is in the pudding as to which approach will lead us to the quote unquote promised land of general artificial intelligence. I think that it's hard to say before you get there which approach is going to be successful. So I think that it's best, if you're a betting man to or woman, to diversify your portfolio, not put all your eggs in one basket, and see how both come to teach you things. I think no one's making an argument that we've learned everything that we need to learn about the brain, and that's just a solved problem. And at the same time, I think no one is ready to say that AI has reached its absolute zenith and there will never be better AI than now. So I think both are worthy endeavors to proceed in.
All right. I would like to take the conversation in a slightly different direction. I did want to ask something more specific to the current program of research taking place in large companies, specifically Google, being such a leader in the field of AI right now. And I'm sure basically everyone in this room is following news stories and following the progress that's been made in self-driving cars and image classification and the kind of applications that we're seeing come out of companies like Google. And I'm wondering if a company like Google has built up an insurmountable advantage at this point in terms of not just data and the vast amounts of data that has been able to collect, but also personnel, as opposed to the kind of personnel that might be operating in academia. And if this advantage is at this point insurmountable in the race to AGI, and if the real cutting edge of research is now taking place behind the walled gardens of private companies' research departments rather than in the open space of universities. I suppose that's a little unfair, I should say, to private research, given that they also publish papers. But what is the opinion of the room here? Do we think that private companies really have all the cards at this point?
Well, with the recent events on the robotics side, where you've seen big Silicon Valley companies hiring up whole departments from universities, I think that you see what's actually in place is kind of a revolving door. It may look one-sided, as if the flight is only from academia into industry, but as soon as industry starts to invest in one area, there are pioneers that are still reaching out into new spaces and new areas. And down the road, they will be either the professors of the future, or they will start their own companies that can then either be purchased or take on their own advantage. So I think it's tied to, again, the idea that we don't have a final answer for AGI yet. And I don't think there's a broad consensus as to what path is to it at the moment. If other people feel like there's a definite path right now, I'd love to hear it. But given that I think people are still searching around for it, there's still an opportunity for those in academia to make a really big contribution going forward.
It just seems like the funding difference is just so dramatic, though, isn't it? Like with academics, you have to apply for funding and apply for grants, and you're always concerned about tenure and publishing. Whereas if you're in a company's research department, I mean, there's none of those pressures. There's some pressure to, I guess, basic competence, but I mean, that's a good thing, I suppose. Whereas again, you just have all these distractions in academia, and it's just so much better funded. I just can't imagine that in the long term, the university will be the place where the cutting edge research will take place. I mean, I guess I could be wrong, but it just seems natural that it'll take place in the research departments.
Well, keep in mind that there are different incentive structures that govern both institutions. So while you may be right that absolute dollars are being funneled on the industry side to a greater extent, the motivations that people have on the industry side can be limiting in a different way, which is that even research and development groups within large companies like Google still have to justify their existence, and they still will get cut if they don't meet whatever level of performance they're intended to meet. Whereas an academic suffers under the, yes, grants and all those sorts of pressures, but also if they publish in the field and make contributions that their colleagues find intellectually interesting, they can continue a research program for quite a while until it hits. So I think academia is the place where much longer bets are happening, potentially 10, 20, 30-year bets that individual researchers are making that may not pay off for a good long while. You don't see Google making necessarily 30-year long plays. So I think it's just different. And it's, I think, hard to count academia out yet until you see some of those things happen. On the biology side, you've seen this just happen with CRISPR, for example. There's plenty of pharmaceutical companies that could have potentially discovered this gene editing mechanism, but it was actually the work of academics for a good 3 decades that bore fruit over there. So I don't see why, in principle, that can't happen in the space of AI.
Well, that's fascinating. And I wonder, Tim, do you have any perspective on this? I mean, you're in academia right now. Are you bristling at my comments about the irrelevance of academia?
Well, I think like science evolves in a way of there's like paradigm shifts and there's like continuous improvements. Currently, we are in a paradigm of using deep learning to build like artificial intelligence. And within that paradigm, I think private companies are very good at doing that because they have lots of compute and lots of data. But on the other hand, if we were expecting for a new paradigm at some point, and I think the academia is the right place for that to be born, just like backpropagation was born in academia 20 years ago. So if we really are in a race towards AGI, I don't think that we are in a right paradigm for in terms of algorithm yet. We are expecting a new kind of approach yet to be invented, maybe biologically inspired, that will lead to like more intelligent machines being built.
That's a fascinating and tantalizing remark, Tim, because I really wanted to ask you specifically about your work with machine learning and what you think the limits are of that technique, because it's been pushed so far. Perhaps the most dramatic use of it outside of perhaps self-driving cars was last year with AlphaGo defeating one of the leading human players in Go, Lee Sedol. And it was fascinating because, all throughout my university days in the early 2000s, I was told by my computer science professors, of course, that Go was this insurmountable challenge to computers. It would be impossible given the sheer number of possible games. And so no algorithm with a pruning strategy would work. But now we're seeing that basically any problem that can be well defined and that could be solved by a human with its neural network, it seems to be something that could be solved if you throw enough data at it, or if you make the computer play itself in any given well-defined game, you can basically get it to play as well as a human can, and in many cases much, much better. So I'm wondering if this technique is a sufficient paradigm to get us to AGI. I guess you're saying no, but that's really my question, is what are the limits to our current basket of techniques?
So I think machine learning is a very general term. And within that general scope, currently people have been intensively using supervised learning to train like models to perform narrow scope tasks. So these narrow AIs have been wildly successful because you could just throw lots of data at those models and they will be able to learn from data and achieve a very good accuracy on your task. But if you're really on a race towards AGI, what we really need is an intelligence that not only perform narrow scope tasks, but be able to generalize to new tasks and kind of like humans do. That still requires machine to learn, just like we humans learn. But we humans are able to learn from very few examples. So we are, since we were born, we're on a trajectory of like continuous learning. We build upon our previous experiences and adapt our capability to a new domain very quickly. So I think one missing piece in current machine learning is the ability to do transfer learning very well, be able to transfer from one domain that the machine already knows to a new domain that it doesn't. And all of the work that we're currently doing are just defining a problem and trying to put the machine to learn to solve that problem. But that's very different from the scenario of how humans learn, building like a continuous lifelong learning experience. So what you really need is like having a machine to learn continuously every day and building upon new experiences to solve new tasks and eventually towards like a general purpose intelligent machine.
So the way that a human learns, the way that I learn, I encounter information and I slowly get better at coming up with solutions to a given problem. And it seems like machine learning is doing a very similar thing. It's following a very similar process. So I still don't quite see how that couldn't be just further and further generalized. For example, if you were to supply some of these algorithms with life logger data from people, recorded from babies or something from the day they were born, you're giving them the same kind of information that a human would receive, and you're giving it, I guess it's unstructured input in the sense that they're not able to, I'm struggling to think of like exactly how you provide the input to the system, but theoretically you could give it the very same input It's just a data issue. Give it the very same input that a human gets. And so is it a data issue, or is it a fundamental problem with our algorithms that it's just not going to generalize in the way that a human's brain with all of its varied structures is able to do?
Well, in your example, humans are exposed to like a stream of videos, but the feedback for learning is very weak. Maybe it's from the feedback of the people that you interact with, or maybe based on like external sensory information. But overall, we don't have like a clear objective that we're trying to optimize, just like what most supervised learning techniques do. And I think be able to learn from very weak and noisy signals, or even figure out what that signal is a very challenging piece of machine learning right now.
Stephen, do you think there's some role for biology here to improve that? And what is it that AI researchers right now are missing that biology might be able to add to the picture?
Well, not just biology, but in the 90s, AI came across the idea of embodied artificial intelligence, where work with robotics began to cross over with AI. And the idea was sort of spawned that interaction with an environment was actually critical to being able to understand how to solve problems, beginning to solve problems in a more general way. And AI, I think, moved forward quite a lot when you began to look at the problem, not just one of pulling in data and building models, but also interacting with the world. So biology is naturally embodied. Whether it's a worm or a human, we all sort of grow up in an environment that we must interact with in tight loops. So I think that perhaps after we get out of the deep learning paradigm, which isn't so much about embodied, and we go back to a more embodied perspective, we may recognize that it may be hard for us to come up with more general intelligence if you aren't using an agent that has the ability to affect the world as well as collect data from the world.
That's a great point. I see maybe Michael has a question or comment.
My question here is, with humans, we find it easy to use our imagination, even if we're trying to do a new task that we haven't done before or learn a new concept. Like, we pretty much use our imagination a lot. And that way, we do not need a lot of data like an AI currently does. My question is, how much of work is really being done right now to kind of improve the intelligence of machines to do new activity that hasn't been done before, or to create something new? For example, if you look at a machine can easily replicate a heartwork, for example, but whereas a human can see different hearts and create something completely new from that.
Yeah, that's a great question. Does anyone want to jump in on that?
So I think imagination is one of the fascinating areas that I haven't seen as much work going into. You've seen a little bit of it with, again, some of the projects of Google reading in a lot of images on the internet and then using neural networks to produce images that don't actually exist, but that are kind of crossovers, high-level crossovers. They sort of produce dreamlike images, but I still think that's a far cry from true imagination. I think imagination is one of those topics that is mysterious because it's one of the higher order functions that the brain produces. It's exactly one of the reasons why I think that further research into the brain is necessary to understand those mechanisms in a deep level. I think we don't need data to do that because we spent our entire lives building up the data for us to do imagination with. And I think that our brains are naturally given to imagination, as you can see in children, to sort of spend all their time kind of in a fantasy, imagination space. So it's definitely a core feature of human intelligence that I think is not well covered in AI, and a lot more work can go into. I'll say one more thing about imagination too, which is that when folks try to build this into a system that you've programmed, I think imagination often can only operate within the boundaries that you've defined a system to have. So if you define an AI that works in chess, or that works in Go, or that works in a blocks world, you could call thinking ahead in the game as an imagination. But again, you'll only be limited to thinking about chessboards or thinking about Go boards or thinking about a blocks world. I think what's mysterious and interesting about the human brain is that it seems to have this unbounded quality where it could think about all of those things or whole other domains that it can just kind of make up as it goes along. So that's one vote in the camp for continuing to learn lessons from how the real brain works.
Tim, any thoughts on that? Creativity?
I think currently all the supervised learning or reinforcement learning techniques, they mostly are trying to frame intelligence in the framework of solving an optimization problem. And we haven't really tried to go into the creativity part, especially because we don't have a very good understanding of what creativity is. And that makes research really hard because you don't have the clear definition of the problem. But I do think, like, yes, as Steve has mentioned, some of the work at Google is very interesting. They could generate like dreamlike images, or the Magenta project, they're trying to like generate music. But another point I want to make is creativity sometimes happens in a human land, like happens when you keep practicing some instrument or some skill for like a long period of time, and then you suddenly become a master in that skill. And that's not very different from, like, say we put a machine to a huge training set and make it keep learning to do that thing until like it become like a good algorithm to do that. So examples, I've seen people try to train like a generative model on the textbooks or novels, and the model is able to generate sort of similar style text that mimic that writing style of the book. So in that sense, machines be able to do like small amount of like creativity from like that kind of style, but we're still like a very long way towards like very fundamental shifts in like creativity where it's like humans do.
Okay.
I thought it was funny that if you think, if it was not clear to you why AI terminology is called the way it is after this episode, it will be stuff like training, as Tim explained very in detail now, but also basically the deep dream, like that became clear to me right now with thinking about imagination, where you try to, what you learn from one data set to imagine the exact thing in another context. I don't know. I never really got the naming really there. But I wanted to ask, as I feel like this discussion of like problem solution based research on AI and biologically academically researched AI. So we didn't really talk about the combination of the two. I think that will be probably something really interesting. For example, when we were explaining, Stephen, about the Open Worm project, for me, it really, I mean, thinking about general intelligence or about the brain or about biologically, there are multiple parts of the brain and they are all more specified to do something in particular better than other parts of the brain. Is that something you've been researching, that how to maybe like combine narrow artificial intelligence using biology into one more general artificial intelligence that can then basically simultaneously use different AIs to make a more broader AI? Is that something you think that the two fields of research might converge?
Yeah, I think that's pretty insightful. Obviously, at this point, in terms of useful applications, it seems like the engineering-based AI approach is taking leaps and bounds ahead in that, voice recognition in the last 10 years has gotten dramatically better, just as one example. And I do think that these are all tools, obviously, that feed back into the study of the brain. So in OpenWorm, for example, we are using machine learning to help us better understand and to fill in gaps on how biological neural networks work. In that case, you have a lot of missing data. Even though we are using sort of the best studied organism, there's still missing data. And so AI is helping us actually better understand those biological networks. So in some sense, the space of unpacking how the human brain works may be so complex that we can't help but bring our AI friends and AI technologies to bear on answering that question. And yes, that will then feed back into hopefully a virtuous cycle where what we unlock then lets us build better technology that then helps us figure out other things. I just did want to say, when it comes to general intelligence or creativity or imagination or even how humans learn to do things, one thing for sure can be said, well, and of course, this to some extent touches on your belief on spirituality, but I'll just put it this way. Nothing in neuroscience has ever shown any evidence that's inconsistent with the idea that everything that encompasses your entire mental life is the product of the activity of the cells that are in your head. So all those things, creativity, imagination, learning, all those things are happening as a result of neurons taking different states of activity in your head right now. So I think what's tantalizing for those of us on the biology side is to say, well, we can debate about the definitions of creativity or whatnot, or we can just go about trying to find out and look inside the brain to see what's happening when you are creative or to see what's happening when you are imagining. And that kind of settles the debate for all time. What we may come up with prior to that may be very clever and maybe come pretty close. But until you see the ground truth and, the strong way that it's actually happening inside the head, we probably won't know for sure how to define it in the best way. So
that also makes me think about how in the future, if we want to give rights to AIs that we develop. Let's say Tim in 10 years develops an AI that he claims is a general intelligence and deserves all the rights and privileges of humans. I think it'll take some of Stephen's work to demonstrate that the mental states inside the algorithms or inside the software that Tim's written actually correspond in, a sufficiently isomorphic way to the states that actually exist in humans and that therefore are deserving of moral consideration. So you may have to work together at some point, gentlemen.
These are two cool examples. Stephen, one question that for clarification, when your comment about how imagination and everything is, or how everything is just basically a product of computation in your head, I mean, that also implies basically that everything can be learned, or the imagination is also just a product of data, isn't it?
Can you say a bit more when you say imagination is a product of data?
I mean, so theoretically, when I think about imagination, it will probably be something where you have a lot of data, but don't use it in the usual way to optimize something and get a very specific result, but using the data in a more anomalous way to maybe make further. I guess I'm really trying not to use the word creativity right now because I will loop back to earlier. But I guess, what I'm referring to is just a twist in my head. We would just basically just asking about creativity. But basically, I was wondering how much that can be deduced or done just by using data.
Right. Well, I guess we understand data in a way that is very much tied to our current architectures for computing. So when you say data, I think a lot about what you might store on a hard drive. The way the brain may represent data may be quite different in substantial ways, although we can make these analogies. But I think one of the reasons why things like creativity and imagination are hard for us right now is exactly because of the way that the brain may store information. So, for example, when you have a dream at night, most of us, these dreams are things we haven't seen before. Some of us have recurring dreams, but the leading ideas in neuroscience would say that, your dream is taking things that you've experienced in the past, maybe things you experienced in that day, and kind of mixing them all up. In some ways, we think that's consolidating some of those memories so that you'll have them for the future, but it's also kind of a replay of what happened during the day. And some people believe that imagination and creativity is very much in the same way. It's a replay or a remix of experiences that you've had in the past. And so when it comes to us trying to simulate imagination or creativity, it's very important for us to understand how it is that the brain goes about storing the experiences that we've had in the past in order to then take the next step to say, well, how is it that it goes about remixing that? And how is it that it goes about recombining what we've learned into new ways? You might look at creativity as anticipation of things that might happen in the future, exploring possible futures, taking the knowledge that we have now and projecting it into the future to imagine all the multiple ways that things might happen down the road. So you could look at that as making different possible futures based on current episodes. So whether or not the way that we think about data right now is sufficient for imagination, I think the jury is still out. I think we have to explore and understand the way that that data deeply gets processed by neural systems before we can fully understand what will be required for understanding imagination.
Great. Yeah. Go ahead, Michael.
If I was just jumping right there, it kind of appears that for the human brain, what happens is that we're able to learn a lot of skill concurrently. So you can learn to play piano, you can learn calculus, you can learn to do different tasks, concurrently. And that, for me, would be the future of AGI. And also appears that given the fact that a lot of people are, the way AI is currently being developed right now, people focus on a certain particular skill set. And you have a lot of different people doing different sets of activities. Like in the future, I'm kind of thinking that there might be a need for some form of infrastructure to form a form of open source AI data or AGI data machine that different people can plug into. So when you have that happening, what you can see right now is that machines can leverage on expertise of other machines and do some open source collaboration. I just wanted to ask, right now, is that taking place? I know that, at IBM Watson, but I don't know how useful that's been in terms of creating a platform for people to tap into, for machines to tap into expertise of other machines. So the question is, what kind of infrastructure do you think, and this can go to either Stephen or Tim, do you think we would need to create an open source learning for machines?
I think Tim would definitely have a great response to this one. Maybe a great chance for you to talk about Moxel.
Yeah, I think traditionally, because private companies own the data, that a lot of the group models are built within the gardens of the private company. So if you look at speech recognition or object detection, definitely Google or Microsoft or other big companies have the best APIs. But I think like if we would like AI to benefit like the public and not just controlled by like a few private companies, we would like a sort of equivalent of open source movement in machine learning that we need to open up the data that is required to train these general purpose APIs or general purpose intelligent algorithms. That's probably one of the reasons why I started Moxo, is to help that we can build a community of researchers and developers to share data and model trained from those data, so that we could democratize the access towards these APIs and people can freely use those APIs in their applications and enjoy the same high accuracy benefit of those models.
That's fantastic. So the final question for us takes us in a broader direction. We've been talking about very specific problems getting to AGI and specific issues relating to the development of AGI. But now what about the implications of this technology to human society in general? And I wonder, if we do achieve this goal, let's say in our lifetimes, will the development of AGI cause power to be more concentrated or more decentralized in human society? We can imagine AGI could lead to intelligent agents that act as the kind of personal Jarvis, personal assistant that could help defend you against the onslaught of spammers and all kinds of other attempts to defraud you or other issues, help to guide you through a more complicated world. On the other hand, AGI could also help governments to track citizens on a massive scale. It's not quite AGI that would be doing that, but just the general techniques of artificial intelligence would help them to do more and more advanced pattern recognition for the purposes of tracking people. AGI could also lead to the creation of super soldiers that have agency and the very same reasoning abilities as human soldiers. So we can kind of see this going in two different directions, towards the direction of power becoming more concentrated and in the direction of power becoming less concentrated. So what kind of world or human society do you envision as a consequence of the development of AGI?
That's a big question. I think that if you look at the sort of history of evolution of complex adaptive systems, you often see a trend towards more organization rather than less. However, that path isn't a straight line. So you may go through disruptive periods where there is more decentralization. I think that we see our own society as a tension between these two things. So the introduction of a disruptive new innovation or new technology like AGI, it's, I think, a chaotic event for human history. I think it's one that causes realignments, that it's not clear how to project which direction they'll take. I would say, though, without giving a straight answer, that we all have to contemplate this along a few other dimensions than we commonly think about. And I think the two that come to mind are political and economic. So on the economic side, I think we have to think about who benefits from AGI and what is the value and the need that is created by it. Does every individual need a personal AI to do something for them that they're willing to pay money for? Or is it more that elites prefer to have it and it provides a service for elites? I guess that's sort of the economic side. On the political side, I guess I'd say, how much autonomy do we think AGIs are going to have? How much autonomy do we think we want to allow them? Science fiction has many different versions of this, ranging from complete sentient, free walking, essentially another species living alongside us, and others have more of a slave race, underclass kind of a perspective. And then others have, a perspective that they're limited in having any self-control or free will, and they're just basically directly serving us. So it's unclear which versions of those things we're going to have. And it's possible that as AGI plays out, we will go through eras where all of those things occur and we go back and forth. So I think when one imagines the impact of AGI, one may have to think about that it's not going to be a single end state, that it would be a continually evolving technology that would play out over quite a lot of time as it interacts with the interests of human beings as well as the interests of elites within the human society.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think for the question of whether the human or is going to be organized more centrally or in a decentralized way, I'm less worried about the way human societies can be organized, but more about the relationship between machines and humans. Because imagine the scenario where we truly have intelligent machines, then having control of those machines is very crucial point. And I'm a little bit worried because we don't have any research or approach that can currently guarantee that we could have in control of those machines. maybe we couldn't predict the future, but if you look at the human history, like the arrival of Homo sapiens, something changed in our gene that made us a little bit different from our siblings. And then that change actually made our population grow much faster than the other species on the planet and eventually lead to the human take over the planet kind of scenario. And if we have intelligent machines that are more intelligent than human, then will we keep the machines as kind of like servants or pets, or the other way around? So that's the point that I wanted not sure about.
Yeah, I think, Tim, you did a great job of addressing the scenario that Stephen didn't mention, which is the scenario where AIs are the top dog. Not that AIs are slaves and not that AIs are free citizens like Lieutenant Commander Data, but instead where they're the overlords. And then how do we control them? And certainly that's another scenario for sure. Now, which one will come to pass? I guess, Tim, you're going with human history here. You're thinking that that's going to be the case, I'm hearing. And Stephen's the true pundit, hedging his bets. Is that the right way to conclude this?
Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. I do think this is a fascinating question as far as what happens here. I suppose in the best case scenario, the AIs do end up with supremacy, but they leave us to our own devices, and then we can decide how centralized or decentralized we want our society to be after they've handled all of our scarcity issues for us. And then we
I'll say one thing, I guess, if not to hedge the bets, I would weigh in on the side that we don't have to worry about AI overlords taking over for the time being, just because one has to imagine that AI has to survive in the same natural world that human beings and all of the animal kingdom does. And right now, the instantiation of AI is still in machines, and those machines have physical limitations, like they wear out, they need electricity, they don't reproduce themselves. And these are things that nobody is proposing yet that we build into AI. So at least for the time being in the foreseeable future, unless we make AI reproduce itself, unless we build computers that have infinite amounts of energy and never require more energy to put in, unless we teach AI to gather its own energy from the environment, unless we teach it to repair itself and rebuild itself, I think that we still will have a fair fight in it. I think a lot of the science fiction cases where we imagine that AIs have taken over from human beings tend to either conveniently leave that out or don't really explain how it is that the machines are able to solve these basic problems of sort of resource gathering. Even the Matrix, I think, had a pretty poor debunked physics explanation that it sort of uses human beings as an energy source, which I don't think is actually practical in the deeper explanation. So until we see that coming out, I think that we're still safe for the time being.
So, but safe, I mean, you just talked about damage done on intention, meaning, for example, by overloads. But what do you think about damage being done not intentionally? I think breakouts might be a very natural thing in many scenarios. What's your opinion on that?
When you say breakouts, what do you mean?
By breakouts, I mean, for example, AI being programmed to do or trained to do a certain goal. And in order to achieve that goal, it will start doing unpredicted behavior that might be damaging in whatever sense to better achieve that goal.
Well, I guess what I'm saying here is that the mechanism through which AI currently can affect the world are mechanisms that humans have built. And so while you're right, maybe a Skynet scenario where AI launches all the nuclear missiles that we have built, that's probably something that we would want to worry about. On the other hand, the fact that we are the ones that have built all the things that AI is going to manipulate gives us, I think, a fighting chance. So we can choose to not give full control of our nuclear arsenal to AI, or we can choose to not build our F-16 so they can be flown and have missiles launched by systems. We can build in fail-safes that only humans can unlock. We can sort of build backdoors into things, that kind of thing. So until the machines start building themselves, I guess what I mean is that, yes, there's a chance for bad stuff to happen, but I view it as bounded by essentially by human agency and human, stupidity, if you will, for the time being.
Right. I think the lesson of Stephen, as well as of Blade Runner 2049, which I just saw last night, is for the love of God, don't let the replicants reproduce. That's the key. Right. So, Tim, I'll just give you the last word and then we'll finish the conversation in case you had something final to say.
Well, I would say that, yeah, we should definitely be optimistic about the research of AI in general because it's really kind of beneficial to the society overall. But if you look at the curve, like a chance of AI taking over scenario, even if there's just like maybe 0.001% of taking over, we shouldn't forget about that, like small chance, that small probability of danger scenario, and we should prepare for the worst.
Agreed. All right, so just before we end the conversation, I did want to give both Stephen and Tim a chance to tell our listeners how they can find out more about them, respectively. So, Stephen, maybe you could give a link to your works.
Sure. You can find out more about the project to build a virtual organism in a computer and a simulated nervous system at openworm.org. And you can find out more about my software company at metacell.us.
Fantastic. And Tim, how can our listeners find out more about you?
You can find more about my research at timshi.xyz. And also you can look at like the cool demos of models on Moxel by going to beta.moxel.ai. And we would love to hear your feedback on this project.
I love both of your creative uses of the new top-level domains that have become available over the last few years. So anyway, yeah, thanks so much, guys. This was a fantastic conversation. I wish it could go on forever, but I really had a fantastic time. So thank you to Stephen Larson. Thank you to Tim Shi. Thank you to our regular panelists, Daniel and Michael as well. And we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. It was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, thanks.
Let's make the future. Visit us online at letsmakethefuture.com.